a bit of historical setting for Daniel. A few weeks ago, we talked about the northern kingdom when we had the story of Jonah, because after Solomon was king, Israel split into two kingdoms, the north, which was Israel, and the southern kingdoms, which was Judah, where Jerusalem was. So the north was conquered by the Assyrians in about 722 BC, and then they disappeared forever. The Assyrians were then conquered by the Babylonians, who then conquered Judah in 597, they showed up and took all of the officials, the king, and all the upper class over to Babylon. And then in 586, they showed back up and burned Jerusalem to the ground. And so the book of Daniel is about one of these guys who was exported or exiled in 597. And the first few chapters of the book, he's working in the Babylonian courts under King Nebuchadnezzar. It's a great name, right? But chapter 6, where we are today, power is transferred from the Babylonians to the Medes and the Persians, who took over the Babylonian empire. So now we're talking like 540 BC. So Daniel's probably an older guy, and now he's working for the the Persians. Gets confusing sometimes. So here's the story of Daniel in the Persian court. It pleased King Darius to set over his kingdom 120 governors stationed throughout all of his kingdom, and over them 3 presidents, including Daniel, to whom the governors would be accountable, so that the king might suffer no losses. Now soon, Daniel distinguished himself above all the other presidents and governors because there was an excellent spirit within him. So, the other governors and presidents looked to find a ground for complaint against Daniel in connection with the kingdom. But no ground for complaint or corruption could be found, for he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption was found in him. So they said to one another, "We shall find no ground for complaint against this Daniel, unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." So the governors and the presidents conspired and then went to the king and said, "O King Darius, live forever! All of your presidents in your kingdom, all the leaders and officials and governors and administrators, agree that you should establish an ordinance and enforce a decree saying whoever prays to anyone, human or divine, for 30 days, except to you, O king, should be thrown into a den of lions. And now, O king, enforce the decree and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked." So the king signed the written decree. Although Daniel knew the document had been signed, he continued to go into his house, which in the upper room had windows that were open towards Jerusalem, and get down on his knees and pray to his God 3 times a day and praise him just as he had before. Of course, the conspirators showed up and found Daniel praying and seeking mercy before his God. Then they went to the king and said, "O king, did you not sign a decree saying that anyone who prays to anyone, human or divine, for 30 days, except to you, O king, should be thrown into a den of lions?" The king said, "The thing holds fast according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked." They then in turn said back to the king, "Daniel, one of the exiles from Judah, has been saying his prayers 3 times a day. He pays no attention to you or the decree that you signed." The king was very distressed when he heard the charge. And he made every effort to rescue Daniel. Until the sun went down, he did all that he could to try and save him. Then the conspirators came to the king and said, "O king, know that it is a law of the Medes and the Persians that any decree of the king cannot be changed." So the king gave the order, and Daniel was brought and thrown into a den of lions. The king went to the den and called out to Daniel, "O Daniel, may your God, whom you faithfully serve, rescue you." And a large stone was put over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, so that nothing concerning Daniel could be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night fasting. No food was brought to him, and sleep fled from him too. Then, at the break of day, the king got up and hurried to the den of lions. And when as he approached the den where Daniel was, he cried out anxiously to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you faithfully serve, been able to deliver you?" And Daniel said to the king, "O King Darius, live forever. My God sent an angel and shut the mouths of the lions, so that I would not be hurt. For I was found blameless before him and before you, O king. I have done no wrong." King Darius was exceedingly happy and ordered Daniel to be brought out of the den of lions. So Daniel was brought up out of the lion's den, and no harm was found on his body. Then the king ordered that those who accused Daniel should be thrown into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives. And before they made it to the bottom of the den of lions, all of their bones were broken into pieces, and the lions overpowered them. Then King Darius made a decree to all the peoples and all the nations of every language, and it said, "May you prosper abundantly. I make a decree to all my royal dominion, that all should tremble in fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God. He endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed, and his dominion has no end. He is able to deliver and rescue. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, for he delivered Daniel from the den of the lions." And so, it went well with Daniel, and he prospered during the reign of King Darius and also Cyrus the Persian. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
My dear brothers and sisters in Christ, I'm prone to hyperbole. Hyperbole is when you say things in extremes to prove a point. I often say things like ever, or the worst, or it's the absolute best, or use extreme examples to prove lesser points. The confirmation kids are really good at this. At least the confirmation kids of the past couple years. Everything, no matter what we were talking about, they would say, "Well, what about Hitler?" Because that was the most extreme example. If you're talking about God's grace and forgiveness, where is it harder to apply that than Hitler? And that's a hyperbolic sort of way of talking about our faith and our theology. Something similar, I think, is happening in the book of Daniel. And I think that's important to point out because it gives us a lens for trying to figure out what we're supposed to get out of this. So, the last line of this story is, "And Daniel prospered during the reign of King Darius and Cyrus the Persian." To me, that sounds a little bit like stories we tell that end with, "and they all lived happily ever after." Right? He prospered during the rest of his life, he prospers. happily ever after. Also, in playing here, the author kind of fudges on some of the history. So they have Darius being the first Persian king to rule after the Babylonians fell out of power. And then he says, oh yeah, and Cyrus. Cyrus was the one who took over the Babylonians, and Darius was kind of this lesser king, who came a few kings later. So history is kind of like being massaged here to give a signal to the reader that this is sort of a once upon a time sort of thing. It's like historical fiction. Sorry, throat dry. But when we start to see that we're looking at a tale, that we're looking at something that's supposed to speak to us about a value, not necessarily tell us, oh hey, if you have enough faith, lions won't eat you. Because, I thought about like putting this to the test and like bringing lions into church today and just like turning them loose and see who's really faithful. Do you know how much lions cost? I mean, I was going to go through it, but lions are really expensive. Especially in Wisconsin, where they're not native. You can get a good deal on bobcats, but not lions. I wasn't really going to get lions. Because that's not the point of the story. Because all of us know that the things that happen to us, the bad things that happen in life, the car accidents, the diseases, the misfortunes, the rise and fall of the economy, aren't a result of our lack of faith. Now, we can point to those things and say it's a result of our sin. That some of these things that happen are because of our own pride, not necessarily individually, but also the sin of all of humanity. We screw the world up. That's true. However, God isn't saying, oh, you didn't do so well this week. Strep throat for you. That's not the way it works. And Daniel makes it through this den of lions. In this world where things are very simple. But even in this idealized story, Daniel isn't spared the lions. He doesn't know going into that den, and he doesn't know when he keeps praying that he's going to get through this okay. The life of faith isn't one of living in a bubble. It's not where we get to be protected from all the problems and ills and random mishaps of the world. But it is one where trust and faith and hope can move beyond those things. Because I imagine when Daniel first went into this pit of lions, all he could think was, well, I've had a good run. I mean, he probably thought he was going to be eaten, overpowered, and have all his bones crushed. But he went in with hope beyond what could happen there. He went in with hope in what Darius even comes to say is a God whose dominion has no end. So I think it's safe to pick on this now, because the election's over. But at the end of one of the last presidential debates, one of the candidates said 3 or 4 times, America is the hope of the world. Or this nation is the hope of the world. And that got right under my skin, mostly because I'm a theologian. And the idea that a country that we built is the hope of the world seems a little bit foolish. Because, hang on with me for a second. Everyone in this story says to King Darius, "O king, live forever." King is going to die. Darius is not going to live forever. And they have this idea that nothing that the king decrees can be ever changed. Laws can change. The things that we set up don't hang on forever. Our cars will rust. Our houses will rot and sink in their foundation. But God's kingdom isn't going to have an end. We get pulled between all sorts of sets of values in our lives. We can put our hope into insurance policies or money or exercise programs or new diets. But the fact of the matter is that no nation and no ruler, no law or building that we establish is going to last forever. It doesn't mean that they're not great. I understand what that candidate was pointing to, that he believed that our country is a great place. And being able to live here is fantastic. We have all sorts of wonderful privileges. However, someday the United States of America won't be here. Just like King Darius didn't live forever, just like his law didn't stay around forever, the Persian Empire was overthrown. Anybody ever had to pay taxes to the Persians lately? No? So, if we're going to put our hope somewhere that can take us through a den of lions, somewhere through a faltering job market, somewhere past strep throat and cancer, it needs to be somewhere that isn't going to have an end. Because we have a living God. A God who is more powerful than any ruler who's ever existed. A God who has a kingdom that was before the world began. That's breaking into our lives all the time when we find that hope and strength to keep our faith, to have hope beyond the dark days and the sleepless nights. In baptism, we're made citizens of a different kingdom. A kingdom that is God's, where we have citizenship forever. Where God's laws don't end, and we can exist with each other, not plotting in petty arguments to try and get each other overthrown because we want to be in charge instead of Daniel. Fancy schmancy Daniel, right? All of us there are loved equally. Whether it's those who have served a long and faithful life in coming to their end, or Miles and Malik who've not done much at all yet, except, sleep and feed. There, each of us is valued because we're children of God. Not because we have that excellent spirit within us and we've never screwed up. Not where some ruler can take revenge on us and throw us or our wives and our children to lions. What sort of corrupt king was that? To punish children and women for the sins of some dudes? That's not the God that I know or have hope in. The God I hope in, beyond all that happens, is loving and merciful, not wanting any to perish, but all to live in the peace and freedom granted to us by the risen Christ. And in God's forgiveness, we always have hope.